The Lost Child. A gaily crowd of men, women, and children were all going to the fair held outside their village in spring. Some walked, some rode on horses, others went in bullock carts. One little boy went running by the side of his parents. He seemed to be full of life and laughter. A number of toy shops lined the way. The child stopped to look at the toys in one of them. Just then his parents called out, "Come, child, come!" The child hurried towards his parents, but his eyes still lingered on the toys. He came to where they had stopped to wait for him. He could see the old, cold refusal in their eyes, but he couldn't suppress his desire and said pleadingly, "I want that toy." His father looked at him in his familiar cruel manner. The mother tenderly gave him her finger to hold.
"Look, child, look,"
she said.
"Look what is before you."
The pleasure of what lay ahead filled his eyes with eager joy. They had left the dusty road on which they had walked so far. Now they had taken a narrow path that went through the mustard fields. The plants were in full flower. The sea of yellow flowers looked like melting gold. Spreading over miles and miles, they looked like a sea of yellow light. Pulled by their beauty, the child left the path and ran into the field. He was jumping like a young colt. A group of butterflies were flitting about on their colorful wings. Suddenly, one of them would fold its wings and sit down. The child would then try to catch it. But when he had almost caught it in his hands, it would flutter away in the air. One bold butterfly nearly settled on his shoulder. Before he could catch it, the mother called out,
"Come, child, come on the path."
The child ran back to his parents. He walked abreast of them for a while. However, he was soon left behind. The little insects along the path had attracted his attention.
Come, child, come."
His parents called from the shade of a grove where they had stopped for some rest. The child went running towards them. A shower of lovely flowers fell upon him as he entered the grove. Forgetting his parents, he began to gather the raining petals in his hands. "Come, child, come!" His parents called as they left the grove. Soon they reached the end of the mustard fields. Now the path led straight to the fair. The child could see many other paths full of crowds. They were all going to the fair. The fair was in full swing. At one corner of the entrance, there was a sweetmeat seller. He was calling out, "Gulab jamun, rasgulle, barfi, jalebi." A large number of men, women, and children were crowding round his counter. The child's mouth watered for the barfi that was his favorite sweet. "I want that barfi," he said in a low tone. The child half knew that his request would not be heeded. So, without waiting for an answer, he moved on. A man stood holding a pole. Balloons of many different colors, red, green, yellow, and purple, were flying from it. The child was carried away by their silken colors. He wanted to have them all, but he knew what his parents would say. They would say that he was too old to play with them. So he walked on. A little further, there was a snake charmer. He was playing a flute to a snake. The snake had raised its head. Its graceful bend looked like the neck of a swan. The child turned a little towards the snake charmer. But then he remembered what his parents had said. They had forbidden him to watch the silly tricks of snake charmer. So he didn't stop there and moved on. There was a roundabout in full swing. Men, women, and children were laughing and shrieking madly as they went round and round in it. The child watched them intently. A pink smile came on his face. He felt he himself was being carried round and round. The ring at first went at a fierce speed. Gradually, it began to move less and less fast. At last, it came to a complete stop. This time, the child couldn't suppress his desire. He made a bold request. Father, mother, please, I want to go on the roundabout. There was no reply. He turned to look at his parents. They were not there. He turned to look at the other side. They were not on the other side also. He looked behind, but there was no sign of them. The child ran from where he stood. A full, deep cry arose from his dry throat. Mother! Father! He cried. Tears rained down his cheeks. In great fear, he ran to one side first, then to the other. He didn't know where to go. Mother! Father! He cried again and again. His clothes were wet with the sweat of his body. His cries now changed into sobs. He ran again, this time to a temple. All people seemed to be crowding towards it. Every little inch of the space was crowded with men and women. The child ran through the people's legs, crying in little sobs, Mother! Father! Near the entrance of the temple, the crowd became very thick. Men jostled each other. The poor child was knocked to and fro. He fell down and was going to be trampled underfoot. He cried at the highest pitch of his voice, Father! Mother! Luckily, a man in the crowd heard his cry. With great difficulty, he lifted him up in his arms. He carried him away from the crowd and asked, How did you get here, child? Whose baby are you? The man tried to soothe the child. He took him to the roundabout and said, Will you have a ride on the horses? The child only shouted, I want my mother! I want my father! His throat tore into 1,000 sobs. The man headed towards the place where the snake charmer was still playing his flute and the cobra was dancing. Look there, child, he said. But the child closed his eyes and shouted as before, I want my mother! I want my father! The man took him to the balloon seller. He thought that the bright colors of the balloons would distract the child's attention and quieten him. Would you have that red balloon? The man asked. But the child turned his eyes away from the balloons and sobbed, I want my mother! I want my father! He was really a very kind-hearted man. He thought that a gift of sweets would humor the child. So he took him to the sweetmeat seller's shop and asked, Would you like that burfi, child? The child turned his face away from the shop and sobbed, I want my mother! I want my father!